Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I'm hugely terrific, you bet.
It looks like we've had a great week so far, and we have a lot to talk about.
We have a great week. Of course, you had, for example, the World Cup finals, which for the most part, you might say Africa played a very, very significant role. For the second time, France wins the big, the big thing, the beautiful game.
Okay, we'll get that.
With the foreign aid from Africa.
We'll get that in a minute. Let's welcome all our Facebook and Twitter followers watching us live from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to ask Shaka some questions and talk to your guy. For me, my role is just to be the guy who brings in those comments. Shaka, let's talk about the World Cup since you wanted to talk about the World Cup. What an incredible experience. France, of course, beating my team, Croatia. I was a Croatia fan. I would not say I was supporting France, so I lost. But I congratulate you guys.
I remember, of course, as a gentleman, I honestly have to say that I should extend sports condolences to you. But let's face it, Croatia, this is the first time, by the way, they reached the final of the beautiful game. So there is always next time. Who knows? 4 years' time?
How about people who say that France won the cup, but Croatia won the minds and hearts of people all over the world?
I don't know. I saw, for example, the Croatian president and the president of France. I mean, let's face it, you couldn't believe what was going on. I mean, everybody seemed to be enjoying the moment, and rightly so, again, because your team, let's face it, you're talking about a country whose population is about 4 million people. And this is the first time that it has gone all that way. I don't think, looking back, even the former Yugoslavia, of which they were a part, probably ever reached that final of the beautiful game.
For me, what struck me was the simple fact that nearly almost every single player on the French team had some kind of roots either in Africa or somewhere else. Most of them were immigrant players.
That is true, but I think that that also is the beauty of being a French citizen, really, because France, in a sense, tells you that it is not really very, very parochial. It's not a very inward-looking sort of culture. It is a culture that is almost like a microcosm of what the real world is. And this is what France is. And let's face it, this is the second time, not the first time, that they have actually won the finals of the beautiful game with foreign aid from Africa.
In fact, you remind me of the time during colonization. For them, they chose to go for assimilado.
Assimilation.
Assimilation,
yes.
rather than colonization.
That is true. And by the way, people forget that at one time during the Second World War, briefly, guess where the French capital actually was? It was in what we call Congo Brazzaville. It was in Brazzaville.
Interesting.
This is where General de Gaulle used to conduct the affairs, because France was split into two. And the guys that eventually won, of course, were the de Gaullists, and their headquarters was in Brazzaville, not very far from Nyakajeme Rukunjiri, by the way.
Interesting. France seems to have had, when you look back, you look at the former presidents of like Ivory Coast, you look at Leopold Senghor. These guys were ministers in the French government, but they were Africans coming from Africa.
That is very true, but then again, you shouldn't very much be deceived by that sort of cultural symbolism, because let's face it, they were using those symbols to give the impression that they were indeed very inclusive. But in reality, really, they were not that very inclusive, very elitist, but they were, people that were probably very intellectual, very ideological, to the extent that they avoided this business of having blood ties. clannish, tribe, ethnic, and what have you. Their argument was that if you could speak French like a Frenchman or a French woman, you could eat like a Frenchman or a French woman, you could dress like a Frenchman or a French woman.
Just like you are today.
Well, but in this particular case, I think I am very African.
Okay.
They dress like an African, then I am an African. And so for them too, it was about socio-economic class, really, as opposed to this business of blood ties.
How about the issue of racism? France has come under fire for being one of those racially charged countries. You've had protests, you have had people getting killed. Does this winning the World Cup mean something for these immigrants who have come to France?
But again, let's face it, I have also told you that this is not the first time that people who were not indigenously French have actually played a very significant role in terms of French pride. So I don't know to what extent this will go, but I think honestly, some of those right-wing French, they should really look at their culture, they look at their country again. I'm sure they were, they were celebrating on Sunday, celebrating the fact that France actually won the finals of the beautiful game. But surely they should also look at those people who were responsible for putting that smile on their faces.
Let's talk about maybe Obama's homecoming. Obama, for the first time after leaving office, made another trip to his father's home country, that is Kenya. He had a great reception there. He had an opportunity to go to where his father was born and had an incredible reception. Your reaction?
This time around, it was not really as much as he previously had. The last time when he was, of course, still serving as President of the United States, the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, almost everything came to a halt in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. In fact, Obama and his delegation literally took over Kenya, really, for the time he was briefly there. This time it was very different. He's not a president anymore. He is the son of the soil because, let's face it, as you said accurately, his father, Barack Obama, Hussein Obama Sr., was born in Kogero, in Nyanza province, which is in the Republic of Kenya. And his wife, Mama Sarah, who Obama regards as a grandmother, is still there in Kogero, and in fact, he paid a courtesy call on Mama Sarah's residence, met with Mama Sarah, met with Said Obama, who happens to be one of his uncles. I spoke with him, in fact, before coming here, and he told me that it was some kind of mind-boggling type of experience, meeting his nephew, in their house. But that there were also some other problems, really, because, again, you see it in the social media, you've seen it in the Kenyan press and what have you. It looks like Obama's sister. The media is calling her half-sister. But the last time I checked, in African culture, really, this is a sister because they share the father. And she is the one that invited him. They are very close because, remember, she is the one, while she was going to school, attending college in Germany, she is the one, in a sense, who reached out to him when he was in the United States. She was the first member, besides Obama's father, to actually come and look for her brother. And she found him in the city of Chicago.
Let's go to a Facebook comment from Samuel Lugavi. Obama is frequenting Africa more than he was president, presenting himself as a friend of Africa. Why now?
But you know, I think the gentleman really is not very accurate, because when you talk about frequenting, it means he's pretty much in Africa and what have you. And I think, in fact, this is the first time he has actually gone to Africa since he left office. And I am told that, I don't know whether it is true, but there is some news suggesting that he and his wife, Michelle, spent actually about 8 days in neighboring Tanzania, in Serengeti National Park. I don't know whether that is fake news, but it is there.
I haven't seen that anywhere.
Really?
Yes.
Oh yeah, it is there. There are even some pictures to boot, and the kind of people that they met and what have you. But with modern technology, you know, a lot of things can happen even when they probably didn't happen. But if true, then it probably means that he probably liked to be in Tanzania, liked his privacy more than he liked to be in the land of his father, because he spent actually about 1.5 days in Kenya. He arrived on a Sunday. He paid a courtesy call on the Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta, at State House, Nairobi. And after that, he paid a courtesy call at former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga at his, Odinga Foundation headquarters on Upper Hill in Nairobi. And apparently, he supports the handshake. He supports the handshake, and he actually believes that the handshake has really been responsible, at least for bringing about some sort of semblance or something really that Kenya needed, really. That there is peace, or at least a semblance of social stability and what have you, and people no longer call each other names and what have you. That, the handshake, which of course a few months ago, as we saw, it was transformed into a hug during the national prayer breakfast. It seems to actually be on the right track. It seems to be making some huge difference, really, in terms of Kenyans coming together rather than tearing each other apart. But I think, if I may have some advice for Madam or Dr. Auma Obama, it's that a lot of people think that she probably needs what is called humility. Some people were somehow turned off because she was able to speak in a manner that was interpreted or translated to mean that she was condescending, or she was contemptuous, really, in as far as her own people, especially those who are less fortunate than her or less fortunate than you and me. And yet, she actually has put in place an institution that is supposed to be for the benefit of those particular people. There was also too much security, to the extent, frankly, that even the local governor, the governor of the county itself, had to be subjected to some security kind of things that were probably uncalled for. Because look at it this way. This is the guy who is the host. Even the member of parliament was not acknowledged, was not given an opportunity, for example, to give a speech. There were people, important people like Gideon Moi, son of former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, who facilitated the handshake between Raila Odinga and his father, Daniel Arap Toroitich Moi. He was not acknowledged. Ida Odinga, Madam Odinga herself, was also there. She was not acknowledged. I mean, so people are saying, wait a minute, this is not good.
Well, the optics there don't look right. Let's proceed, Shaka.
But they probably look better in South Africa, where Obama is today. Okay,
so going to South Africa, let's move along. While speaking at the Nelson Mandela 100th birthday, he was the keynote speaker. Obama, I quote, he said, just as people talked about democracy in the 1990s, democracy seems to be fading away. And he urged young people to resist that cynicism. He didn't mention names, but he seemed to imply that as much as Africa has made progress, you have these leaders, hang-on leaders who have stayed over their welcome, who still want to change constitutions, who still want to be around. Your thoughts?
Fortunately, he is right on the money. He's right on the money, but unfortunately, he had a very unique opportunity when he was arguably the most important political leader on this earth. And he wasn't really able to go beyond talking the talk. Because let's face it, I was with him in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, in 2009. And he had a great speech. He talked about how Africa does not need strong men, how it needs strong institutions. But did he actually help to make sure that that happens? I don't see any evidence. He even went to the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, a country that hardly has any democracy by any indication. And he pretty much almost jokingly said, perhaps taking a cue from his national security advisor, Dr. Susan Rice, that in fact, Ethiopia was like 100% democratic, because in their National Assembly, there's not a single member of the opposition. Everybody belongs to the government. And you call that democracy? He also talked about how he was still very popular, but he respected the institutions, he respected the political culture of the United States, which has term limits, that even though he was still very popular, and if he ran for the third term, or something that some others call a third term, he probably would have actually been embraced by the American people. But he couldn't do that. And then he went on and said, but they are Africans who have actually been African leaders. He should have called them rulers, really, because those are not leaders, because they don't need really any support. They don't need any help from the people they claim to lead, because they, in fact, someone would say, impose themselves on their people by using the AK-47 and using the treasury, which they basically, translate into a personal sort of account. They use that to be able to compromise the people, so that people, at the end of the day, simply believe that all you need to do is to be patriotic to your stomach. Now, he said, these people have gotten a lot of money so far. He did not understand why they do not think there is a life, or there should be life, after State House. And it's not only Obama. I've also talked with some other former African leaders who also have told me, or shared with me, the view that, look, this is not uncalled for. There is life after State House. They don't see why these people don't do that. But again, I'll go back to Obama. When he was in the White House for 8 years, he could have probably made a difference by figuring out some kind of policy that would have probably removed the incentives or the attraction of some of these people who happen to be in office, and they used to be regarded by some of his predecessors as the beacons of hope for African democracy, even though, sincerely, they were not democratic at all.
Yeah. You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a place where you get to talk to Shaka. And right now we are taking your comments. Shaka, let's go to another comment here from Patrick Mujuni. Obama does not love Africa. He must be chasing some other thing, but not love for Kenya. Well, your reaction?
First of all, there's a difference, of course, between Africa and Kenya. I think that Obama loves Africa, and I also think that he loves Kenya. If he didn't, he really doesn't have to have a reason, frankly, for going there. He should not have accepted, for example, to deliver that keynote speech in Johannesburg in terms of celebrating Mandela's 100-year birthday. He should not have gone to Kenya, let alone go to Kogero, where, of course, his father was born and is buried. No, he loves Africa. But I think that he's also a realist. he happens to have been a president of a country that is called the United States of America. That does not mean he was actually president of Africa. And the United States has its own political culture. It has its own ways of doing things. And there's no way he could probably put those things aside so that he could be seen to be quote unquote in love with Africa. There are people, including his own brother, Malik, who actually would probably support that kind of argument, who says that Obama was not really useful to them because they did not eat. He did not help them to eat. Because guess what? If those guys were actually brothers or sisters of an African president, especially like in those Great Lakes region and what have you, you know they would have eaten.
Absolutely. Let's cross over. Let's go to Eritrea and Ethiopia. Things seem to be looking very, very good on the ground. The Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki made this journey. Nearly 20 years. He's not been in that country since let's say in 20 years. But he finally made a trip there. Your reaction?
And you could see the smile on his face. This is not a man that has the reputation for being seen smiling really very much, but you could see he was very happy. I think that this situation really whereby those two countries, which in fact should have been one country, except of course for, again, the Berlin conference for the Scramble for Africa of 1884-85, chaired by the German Chancellor, Prince Bismarck. Eritrea and Ethiopia would really be one, but at one time Italy took over that piece of real estate, and eventually, of course, after the Italians lost the Second World War, that country was basically allocated to Ethiopia, the Empire of Ethiopia, to help guide it towards self-determination. And eventually, of course, you know that the Eritreans and Isaias Afwerki fought against Ethiopian, what they called Ethiopian imperialism, for at least 30 years. And eventually, they actually defeated the powers that be, and eventually through a referendum, by the way, I think it was 1993 or something of that sort, became Eritrea.
By 99% of the vote.
Yes, they were very, very close, by the way. They were really brothers, in fact, let's face it. It was the Eritreans, in fact, that helped the rebel group, the TPLF, which was under the late now, Meles Zenawi. It is the Eritreans who actually provided them with foreign aid, provided them with training, provided them with a lot of things that they needed in order for them to essentially seize power in Addis Ababa in 1991. But they end up, having two huge egos, really. We say egos because, let's face it, the war that was fought between those two countries for 2 years, honestly, ending up in about 80,000 human beings dead on both sides for a place, frankly, called Badme. It's not. It's what Obama used to call a damn war. It's not the kind of thing that should happen, really. There was no reason to happen, but it happened. And then the international community, there was the international tribunal, which ruled in favor of Badame being part of Eritrea. But the Ethiopian authorities decided not to acknowledge it. They did not accept that resolution. And so, for almost 20 years, they have not had what you would call a relationship. But let's wait. On Monday, the Eritreans reopened their embassy to Ethiopia, and it was opened by President Isaias Afwerki. Tomorrow, it will be the first time in 20 years that Ethiopian Airways will just be flying actually from Addis Ababa to Asmara. And guess what? We have our own Teweled, by the way. He will be actually on that flight.
Interesting.
Yeah, so something is happening. This really is very serious. And it seems to me that I may probably not have been very, very wrong by suggesting that when we look at Abiy Ahmed, we are probably looking at genuinely a new breed of African leaders. And probably also we are actually witnessing what would be called a trajectory change, or a political trajectory change in the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, talking about a new breed of African leaders, earlier you talked about some of Obama's predecessors who talked about African leaders as the new breed of African leaders.
That was, of course, Bill Clinton.
Yes, but maybe just a quick follow-up. In the early 90s, President Bill Clinton referred to President Isaias Afwerki as a new type of Renaissance African leader.
Yes.
If he was to look in the camera, would he still say that today? What changed if this guy was a Renaissance leader?
It would be very, very difficult for him to say that again. Because let's face it, it is not only Isaias Afwerki, my brother. It was also Meles Zenawi until he died. In 2005, the Ethiopian authorities held an election that is believed to have been won by the opposition. Guess what? It took 2 months to know the results. And when the results came, the authorities decided to retain power. Then you go south, you go to Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. I remember I was in Uganda, my friend. In fact, the press conference was addressed by the then Secretary of State for Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright. She touched Yoweri Museveni at Nakasero and said, "You are the beacon of hope for African democracy." I thought she was out of her mind, you know? And this was 97. Then you look at Rwanda. What have you? Come on. These guys either didn't know what they were saying, or they were saying it to mean different things. You
talked about President Museveni. Ironically, President Isaias Afwerki also, when he was addressing the OAU in Cairo in 1993, he said that he sort of chastised the leaders who stay in power for a long time. What has changed? He's been in power since he took over.
You know, to be very honest with you, it seems to be a disease that afflicts those people who come to power through AK-47. When people seize power, for some reason, they believe that they have a sense of entitlement, to the extent that they are the only kids in town. It is the only game, theirs is the only game in town. They think they have earned it, to the extent that Yoweri Museveni has actually said he killed his own beast.
Shaka,
so
okay.
He doesn't see why people come and want to be part of it.
Okay, very briefly, what are you talking about tomorrow, Straight Talk Africa?
You know, tomorrow it is not me talking about anything, because I'm preparing, in fact, to go on a trip with a guy that is called Paul Ndiho to Zimbabwe and eventually to Malawi and all kind of stuff. So tomorrow it will be guest host Peter Kilote. He will be essentially talking about the just ended World Cup and how Africa provided foreign aid to France to win the finals of the beautiful game. There are also suggestions, by the way, from a Ugandan American journalist, Milton Almadi, saying that it is time that we actually came up with Team Africa, so that it could even be the Africans in diaspora who could actually play in the World Cup. Because guess what? They could actually win it for the pride of the continent.
On a programming note, Shaka and I are traveling to Zimbabwe and Malawi over the next 2 weeks. But in the meantime, we'll have some people filling in for us. Until then, we look forward to seeing you when we return. For now, so long from Washington.
Thank you.
Yeah.